I never thought a ramp could start a war. A few planks of wood, carefully measured and secured, built not to impress but to give my wife her dignity back. To me it was simple, necessary, an act of love, but to the HOA, it was an abomination, a violation, an attack on their perfect little kingdom. The day it began, I opened my front door to find a letter taped against the wood like a scarlet warning. Bold black words screamed at me. Notice of violation. Unauthorized structure. Immediate removal required. My fingers tightened around the paper until it crumpled, but the words did not vanish. They carved themselves into my mind, sharp as blades. It was not a shed, not a swimming pool, not some flashy addition built to show off. It was a ramp. The ramp I had built after the accident. The ramp that allowed my wife, Margaret, to leave our house without feeling like a prisoner. And now, the HOA demanded it be destroyed. I stood frozen on the porch, staring at the letter, when I heard the gentle squeak of wheels behind me. Margaret appeared in the hallway, her hands resting lightly on the rims of her chair, her eyes soft but searching. "What is it?" she asked, her voice already carrying a note of worry, as though she knew before I even spoke. I swallowed hard. "It's the HOA," I said, my throat tightening around the words. "They want the ramp gone." Her lips parted slightly, her eyes wide. For just a second, I saw it. The fear, not fear of Evelyn Parker, the HOA president, not fear of fines or threats. Fear of being trapped. Fear of losing the fragile freedom that ramp represented. Without it, our house would become her prison. I crumpled the notice into my fist. "Over my dead body," I muttered, my voice breaking but certain. Because this was not just about wood and nails. This was about her life. Before I take you further into the battle, you need to understand why this fight mattered. Why I was willing to go against the entire HOA, risk fines, lawsuits, even foreclosure. You need to know about Margaret. We met in college. I was studying engineering. She was in nursing. I remember the first time I saw her. Hair in a messy bun, glasses slipping down her nose, surrounded by a fortress of textbooks in a library. I watched her from across the table. And when she finally looked up, I expected her to roll her eyes at the stranger staring. Instead, she smiled, wide, fearless. That smile undid me. We built our life together one brick at a time. Jobs that barely paid the bills, apartments that smelled of mildew, anniversaries spent with cheap wine and takeout pizza, because it was all we could afford. But those years were golden, because we had each other. Eventually we found stability, careers, savings, a modest home, children who grew and thrived. When we moved into Lakeside Meadows, we thought we had found our paradise, a quiet community where we would grow old together. But then came the accident. It was raining, the kind of night where headlights smear into long blinding streaks and the road shines like black glass. Margaret was driving home from visiting our daughter. A truck lost control, brakes screamed, metal crunched. The doctors told us the truth without softening it. A spinal cord injury, severe, irreversible. She would never walk again. I will never forget the look in her eyes when she heard those words. No tears, no hysteria. Just a stillness, a quiet determination. She did not ask, "Why me?" She asked, "What happens next?" What happened next were months of rehab, nights filled with whispered sobs she thought I did not hear, days of relearning how to live. And in all of it, Margaret never gave up. She fought. She endured. She found a way to smile even when her world had been broken. When she finally came home, we both knew the steps leading to our front door were no longer just steps. They were a wall. So I built the ramp, every measurement precise, every plank chosen with care, every nail driven with the silent prayer that it would carry not just her weight, but her spirit. The first time she rolled down that ramp, the wind in her hair, her smile wide and real, I felt something heal inside me. It was not the life we had before, but it was life. So when the HOA demanded it be destroyed, they were not just attacking wood and screws. They were attacking everything we had rebuilt from the wreckage. And I knew then that this fight would not be about rules. It would be about survival. Lakeside Meadows looked like perfection from the outside. Manicured lawns trimmed to precise lengths. Pastel houses lined up like rows of teeth. Flower beds bursting with blooms that all looked eerily similar, as though no one dared to plant anything original. Even the mailboxes stood in neat formation, identical soldiers in the army of conformity. To visitors, it was beautiful. To residents, it was a cage. And at the center of that cage stood Evelyn Parker. Evelyn was the kind of woman who carried herself like a queen whose crown had been nailed to her head. She wore pastel suits like armor, pearls strung tightly around her neck, her hair sprayed into a helmet that never moved. She patrolled the streets with her clipboard, scanning for imperfections the way a hawk scans a prey. Neighbors smiled when she passed, waved politely, praised her leadership. But behind closed doors, I had heard the whispers. Families fined into debt over mailbox height. Retirees threatened with lawsuits for planting the wrong flowers. Parents reprimanded because their children left chalk drawings on the sidewalk. To Evelyn, compassion was weakness. Rules were not guidelines. They were weapons, and she wielded them with ruthless precision. When I confronted her about the violation notice, she looked at me with the calm detachment of a surgeon explaining a procedure. "I understand it is convenient," she said, the word dripping with disdain. "But unapproved structures are not permitted. The ramp must be removed." "Convenient?" I spat. "This ramp is not a convenience. This ramp is her life." Her painted smile thinned. "Rules are rules. Removal by Friday, or fines will begin." She turned on her heel, her heels clicking against the pavement, leaving me standing in stunned fury. Behind me, the ramp stood silent, a symbol of love and defiance. And in that moment, I swore it would not fall. The fines began 3 days later. $500 for non-compliance. Another notice by the end of the week, adding more penalties. By the end of the month, the total was climbing into the thousands. I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by letters, the papers spread out like evidence of a crime. Margaret sat across from me, her face pale, her hands folded in her lap. "Maybe we should just take it down," she whispered. Her voice trembled, not from weakness but from exhaustion. I shook my head. "No, if we give in now, they'll know they can take anything. Today it's the ramp. Tomorrow it's something else." Still, the weight pressed down on us. Neighbors began to avoid eye contact. Some whispered, "Rules are rules," when we passed. Others simply looked away. We were being isolated. That was Evelyn's strategy. She wanted to break us, to corner us until we surrendered. But what she did not know was this. I had already lost everything once, and I would rather burn down their perfect little world than lose again. That was when the knock came. Late one evening, after another day of silence and stares, I opened the door to find Mr. Carter, the retired attorney who lived 3 houses down. He held a thick folder under his arm. "I heard what they're doing to you," he said, his voice steady, his eyes sharp. "You're not the first, but you could be the last." Inside that folder were years of records, violation notices, lawsuits, financial statements. And at the center of every one was Evelyn Parker. "This isn't about your ramp," Mr. Carter said grimly. "It's about power. And if you're willing to fight, we can take her down." I stared at the papers, my pulse hammering in my ears. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than anger. I felt hope. The first board meeting after the violation felt like walking into enemy territory. The room was brightly lit, neat rows of chairs, polished with tables. But the air was heavy with judgment. Neighbors filled the seats, some curious, some avoiding my gaze, some already whispering that we were troublemakers. At the head of the room sat Evelyn Parker, her pearls gleaming under fluorescent lights, her clipboard like a shield. She adjusted her glasses and smiled, though the smile never reached her eyes. "Next on the agenda," she announced, her voice sharp as glass, "the matter of the Harris residents and their unauthorized structure." I stood, gripping the back of the chair in front of me to steady myself. My wife sat beside me in her wheelchair, her hands folded tightly, her knuckles white. "This so-called unauthorized structure," I began, my voice echoing the hall, "is a ramp. My wife is paralyzed. Without it, she cannot leave our home. This isn't about luxury. It isn't about aesthetics. This is about her freedom, her dignity. For a moment, silence filled the room. A few neighbors nodded. I even heard a scattered clap from the back. But then Evelyn leaned forward, her expression cold. While we sympathized with Mrs. Harris's condition, she said, drawing out the words as though they were performance, "The HOA rules are clear. Structures must be approved. This ramp was not approved. Therefore, it is in violation. Rules are rules. Rules without humanity are nothing but chains." I shot back. Gasps rippled through the room. Evelyn's smile faltered, but only for a second. She raised her gavel and banged it against the table. "Enough. The board has decided. Removal is required. Fines will continue until compliance is achieved." Beside me, Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She reached for my hand, squeezing it tight. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Don't let them take it." I looked into her eyes and knew I wouldn't. The harassment escalated quickly after that meeting. Letters piled up in our mailbox, each one colder than the last. $500, $1,000, $2,000. The numbers climbed like a mountain designed to crush us. One morning, I stepped outside to find a neighbor photographing the ramp, measuring it with a tape as though gathering evidence. When I asked what he was doing, he shrugged nervously. Evelyn asked me, "I don't want trouble." Then he scurried away. We became pariahs. Invitations stopped. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid us. Even the children seemed instructed not to play near our yard. Margaret tried to keep her spirits up, but I could see the toll. She stopped going outside, stopped rolling down the ramp she had once loved. Her laughter grew rare, her silence heavy. One night, as I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by violation letters, she wheeled in. Her face was pale, her eyes tired. "Maybe it's not worth it," she whispered. "Maybe we should take it down. I don't want you carrying this burden." Her words broke me more than any fine could. I pushed the papers aside and knelt beside her chair. "You are not a burden," I said fiercely. "This ramp is not just wood. It's your freedom. And no one has the right to take that from you." She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Then we fight," she whispered. And that was when fate sent us an ally. It was late evening when the knock came. I opened the door to find Mr. Carter, the retired attorney who lived 3 houses down. He was in his 70s, with sharp eyes that still burned with fire. "I heard what Evelyn's been doing," he said, his voice steady. "May I come in?" At the kitchen table, he laid a thick folder between us. "You're not the first she's targeted," he said grimly. "She's been using the HOA as her personal weapon for years. Families fined into debt. Elderly pushed out of their homes. Anyone who stands in her way is crushed." I flipped through the documents, my hand shaking. Violation letters, legal complaints, property records. The pattern was unmistakable. Evelyn wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was exploiting it. "She drives people out," Carter explained. "Then her associate, sometimes a shell company, sometimes her own family, buys the property cheap, renovates it, sells it for profit. It's a scheme, and it's been going on for years." I felt my stomach turn. She tried to make us believe this was about rules. It was never about rules. Carter nodded. "It's about money and power. But she's sloppy. I've been watching her for a long time, gathering what I could, and with your case, we might finally have enough to bring her down." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something stronger than anger. I felt hope. With Carter's help, we began to dig deeper. We discovered the HOA budget didn't add up. Thousands of dollars listed as maintenance, with no records of where it went. Landscaping contracts awarded without bids, all to companies linked to Evelyn's cousin. Selective enforcement of rules. Some homeowners got away with violations, while others were fined into bankruptcy. And then we found a smoking gun. A series of property deeds showing homes foreclosed by the HOA, purchased at suspiciously low prices by a company Evelyn's son controlled, and resold months later at double or triple the value. "This is fraud," Carter said, his eyes gleaming with determination. "She's been using the HOA to enrich herself. And your ramp? That's just the excuse she picked this time." Margaret listened silently, her eyes wide. Finally, she whispered, "So what do we do?" Carter leaned forward. "We fight, but we don't fight alone. We gather allies, neighbors who've suffered, people who've stayed quiet out of fear. Together, we expose her. Together, we end this." I looked at Margaret, then at the ramp outside the window, standing silent and strong. I nodded. "Then let's bring her down." The fight began quietly, almost in whispers, but soon it grew into something Evelyn Parker could no longer ignore. Carter and I started by visiting neighbors late at night, speaking in hushed tones on porches and in kitchens, sharing the documents we had uncovered. At first, people were reluctant. Fear still held them in its grip. Evelyn had ruled with an iron fist for too long. But then they saw the proof. The excessive fines, the forced foreclosures, the homes snatched and flipped for profit, the money flowing into Evelyn's pockets while she preached about community standards. One by one, they began to speak. Mrs. Lopez, who had been fined into debt over a garden bed. The Jacksons, who had nearly lost their home over a mailbox 2 inches too tall. Even quiet Mr. Daniels, a war veteran, who revealed Evelyn had harassed him endlessly about a flagpole honoring his fallen brothers. Each story was a spark, and together, those sparks became a fire. The turning point came when we contacted a local journalist. Carter handed her the files, thick with evidence. She listened, her pen scratching furiously against her notebook, her eyes wide with disbelief. "This isn't just abuse," she said. "This is fraud. This is exploitation." Within a week, the headline hit the papers. HOA president profits from power. Families exploited in lakeside meadows. The story spread like wildfire. Local news crews showed up. Reporters knocked on doors. Neighbors who once hidden their pain stepped into the light, their voices trembling but strong as they told their stories. Evelyn tried to downplay it. She strutted to the neighborhood, pearls tied around her neck, clipboard clutched like a weapon. "Lies," she spat when confronted by cameras. All lies orchestrated by troublemakers. But the cracks in her empire had begun to spread. Then came the final showdown. The community center overflowed that night. Every chair was filled, neighbors lining the walls, reporters with cameras rolling. The air was thick with tension, as if the walls themselves knew history was about to be written. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, her smile brittle, her hands trembling slightly as she shuffled her papers. Behind her sat the board members, some pale, some avoiding her gaze. The meeting opened with routine matters, but everyone knew why we were there. Finally, the floor opened. I stood, my heart pounding in my chest, but my voice clear and strong. For months, we've been fined, harassed, threatened. I began, all because of a ramp. A ramp my wife needs to leave her home. We were told this was about rules, about aesthetics, about order, but it was never about that. It was about power. I held up the documents Carter had gathered. This isn't just my fight. It's all of ours. Evelyn Parker has used this HOA not to serve the community, but to exploit it. She has forced families out, taken their homes, and profited off their pain. Here is the proof. Gasps rippled through the room. Reporters scribbled, cameras flashed. Neighbors leaned forward, their eyes blazing with betrayal. Evelyn shot to her feet, her voice shrill. "Lies! Fabrications! This man is twisting the truth to cover his own violations." But her words were drowned out by Mr. Daniels, who stood with shaking hands, his voice breaking. "She fined me for flying a flag I bled for. She threatened to take my house because I wouldn't bow to her." Mrs. Lopez stood next. "She drained my savings over flowers." Flowers. Voices rose all around the room, one after another, a tidal wave of stories too loud, too raw to ignore. Evelyn banged her gavel, shouting for order, but no one listened. The spell had broken. Finally, one of the board members, usually her staunchest ally, cleared his throat. I moved to remove Mrs. Parker as HOA president, effective immediately. The vote was swift. Hands raised, eyes blazing. The decision unanimous. Evelyn's face twisted, her pearls trembling against her throat as she shrieked, "You'll regret this, all of you." She grabbed her clipboard and stormed out, her heels clacking against the tile like the last echoes of a crumbling empire. And just like that, the reign of Evelyn Parker ended. The weeks that followed felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The fines were rescinded. The ramp was officially recognized as a protected accessibility structure, untouchable by future boards. Neighbors who had been divided by fear began to reconnect. Smiles returned to sidewalks where silence once reigned. The new board, built from those who had once been Evelyn's victims, promised reforms, transparency, compassion, rules that served the community rather than strangled it. Margaret rolled down the ramp one morning, her face lit by the rising sun, her smile wide and free. "We did it," she whispered. I shook my head gently. "No, you did. You gave me the reason to fight." For the first time in months, laughter returned to our home. Years have passed since that night, but the memory remains as sharp as ever. The ramp still stands. It's with weather but strong, a silent monument to the battle we fought. Children race their bikes down the street again. Neighbors wave as they pass, and the air no longer carries the weight of fear. Sometimes I sit at the foot of the ramp, running my hand along its railing, remembering the day I built it, the day Margaret first rolled down, the day Evelyn tried to take it away. They thought they could strip us of dignity. I whisper into the breeze. Instead, they gave us strength. The ramp was never just wood and nails. It was freedom. It was defiance. It was love, nailed into place, unshakable. And as long as it stands, so does the proof. No rule, no bully, no power-hungry president can ever break the spirit of those who refuse to bow.